this, John Trout here, Cider Blossom Orchard. It's May 15th, so the middle of May. We're here, and it's a cool day, another cool day. We've had a series of cool days here now. Up 38 degrees last night. A few nights ago, we were right at that 32, 31 degree mark. So some frost there, and I understand we've had some cool weather across the country there just a little bit. So if that damaged you and your apple orchard, sorry about that. It's been an unusual spring, as most of them seem to be anymore. I wanted to do a video yesterday, and it was just so windy that there was no way I could get the camera out that you would be able to hear me. And so I thought, well, I'll do it this evening, because I wanted to talk today about rye and rust. I see both in my orchard, one because I put there, and the other I can't keep out. But I thought you might be curious of why I plant rye as something of a cover crop in the orchard, and what its benefits are. And I'll show you some examples of that here today. And then it looks like I didn't get some of my rust sprays on in time, and we've got some damage showing up. And we'll look at gold rush, because gold rush is highly susceptible to cedar apple rust, and we'll discuss that a little bit. So May 15th, and these are just a couple of items that you'll find in my orchard today. Let's go have a look at rye. So right here behind me, you'll see a rather thick stand of rye. This is growing up in the tall spindle row. There's actually small grafted trees in here. They're ready to be freed, by the way. It's just a matter of me getting the time to come out here and knock some of this down, which I'm about ready to do. It'll come out here this week. But why do I put the rye in the rows? Well, I guess I'm still evaluating that as I go along. This is the second year I've done this. A little better. This was the first year on this row because I just created these last year, but I like the results I've gotten so far, and I'm going to show you some of those results besides just the rye growing right here behind me. A couple of things with rye. It's a cereal grain that you can find at your local co-op, most likely, especially in the Midwest, and it generally sells for around $20 a bushel. So 56 pounds, I believe it is, of rye you can get for $20. That $20 worth of rye is going to basically overseed your garden. You can underseed your apple trees for a cover crop in the wintertime. Farmers use it in the wintertime as a cover crop. Rye does amazing things for the soil. I'm not going to get too in depth with that here today, but you could read up on it just a little bit. But rye is great for capturing nutrients in the soil and holding those, and then as it breaks down, it re-releases those nutrients. It sends roots in very deep when you allow it to form a seed head, like I've done here. And one of the things about that seed head, you want to wait and cut that rye when it forms a seed head, and that pretty much assures that it won't come back. It won't try to regrow after you cut it. Otherwise, you can cut and recut and recut. This way, it will pretty much kill it after you cut it, after it tries to go to seed. And what you've got then is a pretty good mulch of straw. And if you look under this rye, you can see that it really does a nice job of keeping weeds out. I've got some up on the blackberry patch I want to show you. I've always fought weeds in the blackberries, and I put this in last year, and it did a nice job. It's not perfect, but it did a nice job, and it's going to return some mulch then and break that down into the soil underneath the blackberries. There's no tillage involved with planting this rye. This rye that I put in underneath the apple rows, this was planted in October last year because we never got a drop of rain in September. So I put it in October when it finally started to rain again, and it germinated. And it didn't look like much. If you go back to some of the early videos that I did this spring, you'll see that it didn't look like much on the ground then, just some greenish tips. But then as we start to get that warmth and I fertilized it a little bit, here it came. And it's spotty because of just throwing it on the ground and hoping that germinates. It does get a little bit spotty, but it did a nice job. Something else about this rye I found interesting this year, somewhat by accident, was that it shows you soil fertility. And you can look down the row and see where a handful of fertilizer has been dumped around an apple tree and where there's not been any fertilizer placed. And it's a great check of soil fertility. It doesn't take much to grow rye. And if you're not able to grow rye, it's an indication that you really lack some soil nutrients. So I find that to be another great benefit of the rye and something to see this time of year. Let's go look at a couple areas where I did take some down over the weekend and just how that looks and the benefits of it. And here is next year's trellis row. These are G41 rootstocks, and rye was seeded in with this last fall. I didn't plant the trees to this spring, but I did seed the rye in last fall. And here's where I started grafting this row and ended this weekend. So those are those G41 stocks that have been grafted. Not really the point of the video, but I did want you to see how we get some decent weed suppression. And again, this was not planted very heavily at all. But then you get a nice straw mulch down there on the ground. It looks thin right there on the video, and it is a thin area right there. You look at an area like that where it's a little bit thicker, which wouldn't take much at all to maintain that type of thickness. You get a nice mulch, and then that's all going to break down and feed these young plants, keep weeds at bay for just a little while longer. It's a good product. Let's go look at the blackberries. Here is the blackberry row where the rye was obviously just a little bit thicker than I had it down there on the apple plantings. But you can see it did just a great job. There's very few other plants growing underneath that rye, underneath these blackberries than the rye. And that's been hard to do on these blackberries over the years. I just cut this 2 days ago as it was going to seed and tried to pile up what I could underneath the blackberry plants for a nice little straw mulch, which it will become. And you can go through and knock some of this out if you'd like out of your blackberries. It doesn't bother me too much, and it's a little bit of food for birds. And then right over here is the tall spindle at the top of the garden. And we have the same effect where it did a nice job of taking out weeds. Again, rye is something of a weed suppressor, and it leaves a nice mulch. These stalks will slowly break down. And if you came through here with a broadleaf killer in early spring and took out those early spring broadleaves, I think you'd be in better shape yet. I would expect this will keep most of the weeds at bay until mid-June. That's a month from now. We'll see. Now to rust. Okay, I've talked to you before about cedar apple rust being one of the big pests I deal with because I do have a lot of cedar trees around, and this is a gold rush tree, which is very susceptible to cedar apple rust. I'm amazed at the trees that are susceptible to a certain pathogen while another variety right beside it is not. But you can see on this gold rush tree these brown spots, and if gold rush was prone to scab, I might think that those are scab lesions, but I'm having some trouble focusing. But it's got to be cedar apple rust. And my guess is this hit me sometime during blossom or late blossom, and I did not get sprays on there. I know we had a period of about a week that was just wet, and we were in blossom, and I held off on those sprays, and I think it might have cost me on this first go around. I use Rally 40 to spray for cedar apple rust, and typically only give it a couple of sprays in the spring, and that takes care of it. I'm probably looking at 3 sprays with Rally 40 at least this spring. But Gold Rush is very susceptible. We can go look at another variety now, and you would not see a spot, such as a Liberty tree. You wouldn't see any cedar apple rust. But we've got it here. We'll watch how it unfolds throughout the season and just what that looks like. Should have treated the fruit in time. That it's not going to be a problem on the fruit, but it does damage the leaves, hurts photosynthesis, that type of thing. It's not. I've seen trees just covered up with it, and it does damage them to the point of they won't fruit, they won't form blossoms next year. I don't think we got there with this tree or any of the others that are susceptible, but not treated, we could be in some trouble like that this year. In Zone 6 here in southern Indiana, everything is happening right now. Apples are getting bigger every day. Trees are growing a little bit every day. There's vigor in the roots, there's moisture in the ground. The soil is relatively fertile. So this is what we spend a lot of time thinking about, and this is when a lot of the work begins. So we're going to talk about sprays in some upcoming videos. It's a taboo subject, but if you really want spotless apples, we're going to talk about sprays. And even if you're organic, you're going to spray. It's just what you're spraying. So I'm going to explain to you what I do. And I'm not the best, as we saw with the cedar apple rust. I've still got a lot to learn. But I have changed a lot of the ways that I do my spraying. So I hope all is well with you and your orchard. We'll talk soon. Thanks for watching.